Hey guys, David Vos here. Well, it's another beautiful, cool, winterish day here in Alabama. Hope you're having a wonderful day. Guys, we got some very interesting stuff for you on this whole mud flood situation and the Tartarian thingy, madingy, and all of the other dingy thingies. Well, take a look at that. Believers in the Tartaria conspiracy theory are convinced that the elaborate temporary fairgrounds built for events like the Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco in 1915 were really the ancient capital cities of fictional empires. Okay. It says in 1908, architect Ernest Flagg completed the Singer Building in Lower Manhattan, a Beaux Arts showstopper made for the Singer Sewing Machine Company. From a wide base, a slender 27-story tower rose, topped by a mansard roof and a delicate lantern spire. Every inch dripped with sumptuous detail, inside and out. Vaulted roofs, marble columns with bronze trim, windows mullions with spiral fluting. The lobby was said to have a celestial radiance. A book was written just about its construction. For a year, it was the tallest building in the world at 612 feet, and a celebrated landmark for decades after that. But not for too much longer. Despite its great height, the pencil-thin tower lacked office space. Oh, can't use that beautiful mansion. It doesn't have enough office space. In the 1960s, the company sold its ornate headquarters. Demolition proceeded in 1967. It's the tallest building to ever be peacefully demolished. And there's the picture of that beautiful thing. Why in the world would anyone tear something like that down? You know, they might say, well, it's taking up space and we could build something more efficient. But it's art. It's an antique. It'd be like taking an old master violin worth thousands of dollars and saying, well, it doesn't play the way I want it to. I'm going to bust it and I'm going to go build a new one. Well, you go build a new one, but keep that old one. It's beautiful. It's an antique. It's got value just in its history. And this building is beautiful. But for some reason, they felt the need to completely demolish it. By any account, it's a fantastical tale. Once the tallest building in the world and a New York icon, knocked down in just a handful of decades. Well, it does boggle the mind, but you got to realize that as amazing as it sounds, I can't personally understand why they would tear something like that down. But in that case, I have to say, well, they did it, didn't they? So I don't have to know why to know that they did. Why did they do it? That's another question. There are certainly some idiots out there that do financial... it's not like they could just keep the building somewhere as an antique just to look at. You're wasting all that space in downtown New York or whatever. It's valuable land. I get it, but it is kind of incomprehensible. But we can't make a story about the mud flood and Tartaria and prove all of these crazy theories by some story of a building that was demolished that nobody knows why, but, we just make up some fanciful conspiracy around something like that. You can't. We absolutely need some proof to go around creating these intricate theories about some mud flood that was worldwide and destroyed a civilization and reset the whole thing. I can definitely see something was going on. And I have my own theories about that. But I still haven't yet found proof for any kind of mud flood. But let's keep searching. So, we got some very strange pictures. That's a pretty neat building right there. It's like the Capitol, but it's not white. I like it red like that. Is it red? I don't know. It's black and white. But there's a lot of rubble. What happened? Was there an earthquake? I don't know. I ain't got time to read the history books to find out what happened, but something happened. There was a guy sitting there with a suit and tie and a top hat, right? And he's got a briefcase and he's doing something, or he's got a pipe sticking out of his mouth. That seems apropos for the day. So, I mean, it happened. I don't know why, right? Is it some worldwide mud flood? I don't think so. I wouldn't go to that conclusion. What else? We'll take a look at that. Now, that is peculiar. Now, there's something that boggles my mind. You know, the mud doesn't bother me too much, but this does. So there's a picture on the left, top left, of Brazil. And there's Chicago on the top right. Doesn't it look like the same city? But it's not. And then there's Germany on the bottom and the Vatican. Well, there's definitely some kind of sameness there. Somebody had the bright idea, had to be the Masons, right? Whoever these Masons were, these architects, they were going around building these buildings all over the world. So you see what the real conspiracy is that we thought we had all these kingdoms, like the United States was our own separate sovereign nation. France and England and Russia, we're all nations. China. Turns out the Vikings took Beijing many, 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 many years ago. Thousands of years. They've been running the world for a long time. And wherever they go, they burn it down, baby. They demolish and destroy, and then they build it in their own image. And they've been doing this for a long time. Why? Man, that's a question you need to ask somebody who's a lot better psychologist than I am. I cannot figure out for the life of me why these people are doing what they're doing. So they show pictures like this, and you look up mud flood on the Google, right? And that's the Great Chicago Fire in 1871. So evidently they burned Chicago down in 1871. And you have to wonder, does that kind of a brick and stone, concrete, pavement, steel beams, I mean, even, I suppose, could be some wood and plaster, but does that just take off and burn everything to the ground like that? It looks like a nuclear bomb hit Chicago. It's like they made sure it all burned down to the ground. If you look down to the other picture, that's the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001. Yeah, if we didn't need to know more clearly that conspiracies do happen. That's the Chicago Fire of 1871. That's another picture of the Chicago Fire. Burned most of it down. Here's a picture. I mean, this has nothing to do with the mud flood, but I just thought that was an amazing building. It's hard to believe that these people built these buildings. But then when you think about these little idiots that went to Salt Lake and built that massive thing in 40 years. But some of these people claim they built these things in just a couple of years. Like this whole city of Chicago was supposed to have been built just in a few months. It's incomprehensible, isn't it? Well, they did draw their cities something like that. You see there's pyramids in the background and obelisks, and in the foreground it's Rome, and then beneath that is Greece or something. I don't know. Interesting, huh? That's kind of what they do today. In modern times, they build a couple of pyramids and some obelisks and some towers and, different things. Look at that one. Wow. I guess people are wondering why they have these steeples. They look like little iron rods. Probably because the lightning would strike the iron rod on top of the building. I don't know. It's probably called a lightning rod. Just saying. I don't know. Otherwise, lightning could strike the building and destroy it. Maybe that's why they did it. These cities and these buildings are just out of this world, aren't they? Almost looks like little propellers on top of that one. Like it's a UFO ready to take off or something. It seems like there's, in every city, you notice, they'll have a a big building of some importance, I guess. And then there's a street going off like a V to the left and one off to the right. Seems like, isn't that same spot there in New York? They got something similar to that, Times Square or something, where they always film the New Year's celebration or something. What is up with that? I think the original spot where they did that was in Berlin. So there's the one in New York, the Times Square and Broadway or wherever they call this. It's very iconic. But then we have this other building that is similar to it, got the same road V shape, and that's the Flatiron building in Chicago. And it's, I don't know what word to use, it's like iconic. And I thought, where does it come from? Because they build all their cities with symbols. I noticed that in Chicago, they had this big Ferris wheel. I know that was the first one because the guy who built it was Ferris. And then I realized that they patterned the Emerald City and the Wizard of Oz after that city in Chicago. And of course, they also patterned the Disneyland, right? That little city with the... And you really take a look at Disneyland. See, the symbols are so convoluted that at first glance you think, oh, it's wonderful. Right? It's a little happy city with little happy animals. But no, these animals are grotesque. They got big teeth. They take baseball bats and beat the living pulp out of each other. They fall off of big cliffs and flatten on the ground, and then the other cartoon character comes over there and stomps on them and beats them some more. It is brutal. All they do is fight, like Tom and Jerry, two little mice and a cat. But their whole point is to kill each other. But you know, these old cartoons like Mickey Mouse, we look at them today, we think, oh, cute little Mickey Mouse. But originally these cartoons were very dark, very evil. Donald Duck, Mickey Mouse, they were very evil creatures. Watch some old cartoons. I mean the old ones, the very first ones. Disneyland isn't like today we think of the dwarfs. Snow White sounds so nice, right? Of course, you don't know that the dwarfs probably represent some sort of 7 demonic beings or something. Like they got these big ears like Spock or something. But they really started this with these weird little crazy looking evil demonic creatures that they turned into cartoons to lure the children in. These big gothic buildings. What would children want to go into a big gothic castle for? What did they do in castles? They brought you in for an inquisition, took you down the basement and tortured you. This was a kingdom, victory over the world, to make you a slave. But they have to lure you in. They couldn't just force you, see? They had to lure you in. They needed slaves to build the buildings. Come on down, we'll pay you a lot of money. And we'll give you sex and violence and evil. And they're all lured in by the orgy of evil, the demonic orgies. That's what it was. It was, you look at the cartoons and it's propaganda for the children. And a lot of these pedophiles are coming out of, they found, who's that little girl singer? Oh, I don't remember which one. Her dad's a country singer. She got her hair cut off like a butch now. But she started off with Disney and all these, Britney was a Disney person. And they were sex trafficked. Yeah, they were used. I mean, think about the fact that they just used these children. They took Britney, and her dad took all her money for years until just recently, I guess. Right? Just used her, drugged her up. I'm sure she was passed around from all, to all the billionaires. They had theirs, and made her a big star. This was Disneyland for you. And this is their model. So, they got the big Ferris wheel. It's a big fun place, right? What kind of fun? Pleasure? Evil? Parties? to lure in the children. Why? For pedophilia. So it started there with Chicago and this big Ferris wheel. But remember, it couldn't have started there because in Chicago, it was patterned after some architecture from Greece or some from Rome. We see some Egyptian obelisks thrown in, some Istanbul thrown in. We've got Gothic symbols. We've got a whole hodgepodge mixed up of ancient cultures. And I start thinking, is this just is it like a trophy? Every time they conquer a civilization, they put another star on their lapel, another trophy in their trophy case. And so when they rebuild their new civilization, they start over in another civilization. They move their headquarters to some other country and take over those people. They start off in Egypt and they went to Assyria or Babylon or, Persia. And every place they would just uproot their headquarters and move over. And the local people didn't know what was going on. They weren't nobody would have thought of, hey, let's get a standing army and go and conquer the world and destroy and rape and pillage. No, they were just people trying to get along, and they were being killed by the wild beasts and the elements, and it was hard labor. Life wasn't easy. So these people would come in and lure them into the cities and say, oh, we'll give you good money. You can live in a nice plush apartment. We'll give you sex, violence. Your husband can work in the mine night and day until he dies at a young age. But hey, you can send money back to the family. And of course, we're going to take it all in taxes and everything. And you have the nightlife, the theater. I mean, what is a city? Well, they had to make a big theater downtown, right? Up in lights. On Broadway. Where did Broadway start? I think it was in Berlin. And I think that was their last empire before the Great Reset, where the evil people were there in Transylvania, right? All this movie stuff about vampires and Batman and all these other weird things. So the same people had already conquered Mongolia. They had conquered Baghdad, Iraq, Persia. They conquered Russia and Germany, and now Transylvania, probably conquered all over the world. And then they came to America, and there was these Tartarians there, this Chilago with this Tartarian symbol up, holding it up in the air. We saw that. And that city was there for 300 years. So they came and burned it down. There was a great fire in Chicago in 1871, and then they rebuilt this little weird city, I guess, in a couple of months. And in 1893 or 4, they burnt that down. But what is going on here? What was all this architecture from all these different places that they had conquered in the past? And they rebuilt it in some sort of show off of this is all we've conquered. So I'm thinking that city, just like Chicago, every other city now, like London's got a big Ferris wheel. Washington, D.C.'s got a Ferris wheel. And all the little towns have got to have a Ferris wheel. The fair's got to come through every so often. And the carnival, carnivore, carna evil. But my friend Joshua says carnival is it's like a cannibal. Because the V and a B is interchangeable. They're cannibals. And they come bring their tent, and the bearded lady and the big brute that comes and he scares a giant and he eats, babies in the glass, and he's a beast, the beast man, right? He's held in a glass cubicle, and you unveil it and show the people the evil monster. And you have games and you tell their fortune. Because there's wicked witches and haunted houses here. It's a fair. Well, that's a nice word. It's a carnival. That's a little worse. But what it really is their plans. They're unveiling their plans upon the world, and they keep building these cities everywhere they go and tearing down the old civilization and resetting. Because somebody else was doing some good stuff, building libraries like Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great. But the Vikings came down, and the Mongolians and Genghis Khan and the vampires and Vladimir the Impaler, and all these evil people would come in and murder and pillage and kill until they literally drove them out to America. They made a constitution in America, and then they came for us over here. And whatever cities were over here for 300 years, they got here and they destroyed them, burned them down. But when they rebuilt New York, when they rebuilt Chicago or Chicago into Chicago, they put a Ferris wheel. And they introduced or unveiled their plan to make the witches and the little goblins and the demonic civilization that would lure the children in and all the pedophilia. They were telling you what they were going to do. They were unveiling their evil plot. So where is the source of this plot? Well, evidently, originally they were in Egypt, and then they went to Babylon, and then Yahweh went to Babylon, and they were trying to get to the divine being, the gate of El, Babel, and he confused their languages and scattered them all over the world. See, that's what Yahweh does. He resets. He wants to keep a people down. You don't want advancement. So he started selling them electricity so he could make $1. Don't want us to have our own free energy. So then I started thinking about a few other things. Take a look at this. Potsdamer Platz. It's a public square and a traffic intersection in the center of Berlin, lying about 1 kilometer south of Brandenburg Gate and Reichstag. Remember the Reichstag? That's that famous spot where they did their false FLAG to get the war started. Kind of looked like 9/11. It's almost identical. They do a lot of things symbolically. Well, it was the German Parliament building. And close to the southeast corner of the Tiergarten Park. Garden Park? It is named after the city of Potsdam, some 25 kilometers, 16 miles to the southwest, and marks the point where the old road from Potsdam passed through the city wall of Berlin at the Potsdam Gate, after developing within the space of a little over a century from an intersection of rural thoroughfares into the most bustling traffic intersection in Europe. It was totally destroyed in World War II, and then left desolate during the Cold War era of the Berlin Wall. So what did that little thing look like? Well, there's a picture of it down there. You can't really see up in the air like that. See, it's like Times Square. Now, doesn't that look like Times Square? Yeah, let me show you another picture. So you're going along straight, and then you got to it turns into a V. You can go right or left. And this big famous place over there in Germany. And if I'm right, that the Germans literally won the war. And they just moved their headquarters into several locations. London, Moscow, and Washington. So I was looking at this, and you look at over there on the left. What is that picture? That's a lot of people. And they seem to be celebrating something. That looks like Times Square. And right there in front of, there at Times Square looks like the Statue of Liberty. I don't know. They just kind of made a fake one and put it there and celebrated. I'm not sure. I don't have really time to look into that because I'm not sure what's going on there. But it's obvious that it's an iconic location. Well, take a look at this. That's what they're celebrating. This is black and white. It's kind of strange because that person, which looks like a statue or something, he's holding up 2 peace signs, which is actually the V sign. I'll show you that here in a second. But doesn't that look like Hitler himself? Führer. It looks like it to me. And the reason it looks like it is because it is a picture where throwing up the V sign. Right? Now, we're told something different. We're told that V sign is victory, but it's for the Allies. But here they have the people in New York City are holding up like, hurrah, hooray, and they got on their shoulders carrying him through the streets at the end of World War II. They're all happy and celebrating, and there's with the victory sign. Now, what is that supposed to mean? I have no clue. But let me show you something. Here is the V sign. I didn't even really know it was a V sign. I thought it was a peace sign. But it's actually a V sign, and this is the Wikipedia. It says it's a hand gesture in which the index and middle finger. Okay, we know how to make that sign. But down here, it shows Second World War V for Victory campaign. Winston Churchill. Remember the other, I don't know, a few years back when Roger Stone, I don't know, like 2 or 3 years ago, and he was being taken to court and all that. He come out of the courthouse with the 2 hands in the air with the V sign. Now, it looked to me like he was imitating Nixon. Nixon threw up the V sign. Now, of course, Nixon didn't like the Bavarians at all, at least on his private tapes that he was caught, and he was impeached over these tapes, and he was talking about these Bavarians. He didn't like them. He didn't like gay people. Nixon was obviously flashing this sign because it had already been made popular by somebody else. And of course, it's not just Winston Churchill, but there was the whole movement of the hippie movement, right? And all the hippie kids were running around flashing the sign. Do you know why all the hippie movement was flashing the sign? Do you think it was spontaneous? Do you think all the people in the United States just started listening to rock and roll music spontaneously and becoming Satanists? Because remember, the rock and roll music industry was promoted by Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan. And he was doing all these signs and flashing signs. And believe me, he was a student of Aleister Crowley. And do you know that it was Aleister Crowley and Anton LaVey, the Satanist church, that promoted the V sign? Do you know that Aleister Crowley was a triple agent? He worked for the British, he worked for the United States, and Hitler. They were all working together. It was one big plot. And the V doesn't mean victory for the Allies. It means victory for the elite who are taking over the world. Let me show you that. Now look at this. I want to show you something that's going to blow your mind here. By July of 1941, the emblematic use of the letter V had spread through occupied Europe. On the 19th of July, Prime Minister Winston Churchill referred approvingly to the V for Victory campaign in a speech, from which point he started using the V hand sign. Early on, he sometimes gestured palm in, sometimes with a cigar between the fingers. Later in the war, he used palm out. Now, there's a big difference. Palm out is peace and victory, I guess. Palm in is like, screw you. So he did both. There's a good sign, there's a good peace sign and a bad peace sign. And it says, after AIDS explained to the aristocratic Churchill what the palm in gesture meant to other classes, he made sure to use the appropriate sign. I'll bet he did. But look at this. The Germans could not remove the sign, so they adopted the V sign as a German symbol. Now, you've got to be pretty gullible to believe that the Germans adopted the victory sign of the Allies and just said, hey, yeah, we'll use that sign too. Because you see, this is just what they're telling us. The truth is the Germans were using it and the Allies, and it weren't neither the Allies nor the Germans, but it's just the elite Bavarians that rule the world that were using it amongst themselves. And then when they brought it over to America in the 1960s, they adopted it as this sign of victory that we're running around smiling, thinking it's about peace and love, but it's not about love. It's about the orgies that they plan on putting upon us and the MK Ultra mind control they were going to put on our children through the rock and roll music. And they were laughing it up because one of the people, Ein Führer, that's why they held him up in the crowd. You think it was just a bunch of protesters or some silly celebrants there that day on Times Square that decided to lift Hitler up in the crowd and he was waving the 2 V signs? No, what they're saying is that we are winning. Not you stupid peasants, but they, the elite, they're winning. And they've put their city and built their kingdom of darkness all around you. And you agreed to it. They lured you in. So Germany adopted the V sign as well. But think about this, but they added laurel leaves under it. Oh my goodness. Remember when we saw that picture the other day? Then you can see. But the original statue that was given to America there at Chilago, that was the second largest statue in the world. It was remember they had a pole with a Tartarian symbol on it that said liberty. It was a liberty cap. Well, when they rebuilt it, they burned everything down. They burned that statue down, right? Edison and the barbarians that came over here, they burned it down and they rebuilt a statue smaller. And everything was identical except they took the liberty cap of the Tartarians off of it and put a plaque that said liberty with the laurel leaves. And that's very important. They don't do things accidentally. Whoever put the laurel leaves on that statue was the same people that run, the Nazis, who also used the laurel leaves as their control. You see, because remember, laurel leaves mean victory itself. They mean victory in the sense of slavery. We've controlled you. We've got you surrounded. That's what it means. And I'm not going to go too much into that today in this video, but we've covered that before. The laurel leaves means victory, but not the kind of victory like for the peasants, for us, the people, but the victory of them over us. And it means their law or their order of things, the New World Order. So there you go. So there is a German V sign. It says a German V sign and slogan on the Palace Bourbon in occupied Paris. The banner beneath the V reads, "German is victorious on all fronts." I think this story that they are telling us, that it got started with Winston Churchill, makes no sense, since he didn't even know how to use the sign, right? They told him to do the sign, right? Because who's telling everybody to do this sign? Who's the one who got this V peace sign started with all the hippies and told the Beatles to do it, right? And the Beach Boys and Aleister Crowley and the Satanic Church. Who told them to do that? Probably the same people that told Winston Churchill, and he didn't know how to do it. And Hitler, right? Hitler was doing it too. So, it doesn't make sense that they're all doing the same sign unless it's the people who got victory over us. And the proof of it is the laurel leaves. But now take a look at this. In 1942, Aleister Crowley, a British occultist, you all know who he was. He had a place here in Pasadena, and he built the Temple Ordi, and he had all these students, some of which started NASA, the CIA, the Satanic Church, the Church of Scientology. He was actually a student of Charles Taze Russell, who started Jehovah's Witnesses just a few years before. But in 1942, Aleister Crowley, a British occultist, claimed to have invented the usage of the V sign. So now we know where it came from. It's an occult sign. It has nothing to do. That's why, Anton LaVey was teaching people back in the day how to flash the bull sign and the curse sign. And all the people in rock and roll are around flashing it. And they do the upside down pyramid too. And that's what Trump flashes a lot. Or the 666 sign that Trump flashes a lot. These were all invented by Aleister Crowley, who invented all of this evil. Him and John Dee and Edward Kelly brought all this evil up out of the channeling discourse they had with the demons. And they created the Illuminati. They infiltrated the Freemasons. But they invented these signs, secrets that nobody else would know but them. So they told us it meant peace, but it really was a sign of victory of them over us. And so Aleister Crowley invented it, and as a magical foil to the Nazis' use of the swastika. See, that's what they're telling us, that he invented it to counter the swastika, but it doesn't make any sense because Aleister Crowley, remember, was of the same occult brotherhood as Hitler. The Vril Society was a sister organization with the Skull and Bones that Bush went to. And, Prescott Bush Papa Bush's daddy was a banker and financed Germany. So did Ford. So did all these others, right? So did all the bankers over here. They came over in Project Paperclip. So did Werner von Braun, who did their space agency and whose great-grandson is Elon Musk. Yeah, because Werner von Braun wrote a book saying that Elon would take a colony to Mars. Now, how did he predict that? Well, because, he made it happen. It's his grandson or his nephew or something. So, we know then that the Germans used the sign. So it would be kind of stupid to say that he invented it to counter the swastika when the Germans are using the sign as well. They always did. It's the elite that used the sign. He maintained that he passed this to friends at the BBC and to the British Naval Intelligence Division. Must have passed it on to the, German Intelligence Division too. But anyway, it gained approval, and then Winston Churchill started using it, and it came out of his 1913 publication, Magic. Featured a V sign and a swastika on the same plate. Oh, so Aleister Crowley used the swastika, as well. The same. They used them both sides. I rest my case. But in case you guys didn't see what I just said, look at what it says there in the text. Crowley noted that in his 1913 publication, Magic Book 4, featured a V sign and a swastika. And you're telling me that Aleister Crowley did not like or know Ein Führer? Yes, he did. They had membership together in this Illuminati order started by Weishaupt in 1776. They were brothers. But let's get on this mud flood thing. Why are Roman ruins below street level? Rising river levels such as the Tiber flooded lower Rome, and the applied material was often not removed by returning residents. It got to the point that the ground floors and first floors of tenement houses actually became basements. Oh, so there was some flooding in cities. But does that mean that if we find 5 or 6 pictures on the internet that looks like a flood occurred or there was a basement or something? And by the way, we noticed that a lot of houses have basements and just a little bitty window poking up. Like, is there more window? Does it, why did they always put windows, half windows for the basements? And then sometimes we see these pictures where if you dig down, you find there's window beneath the ground. Well, perhaps over time, the wind blows dirt over a certain area. Their projectiles stick up and it becomes a windbreak, and the sand and the dirt piles up. And over maybe 100 years, perhaps some of the towns, because they're big buildings, the sand, the wind blows, the leaves blow, and everything gets caught. And sort of the city becomes a little lump of dirt. And then you just keep building on top of the city. Well, now that is very likely that does happen. And so we're talking about cities that seem to have 100 years prior underground areas that the people that lived there 100 years later didn't really understand or know why it was there, because it seems like nobody writes about, oh yeah, gradually our town ground level raised over a period of 100 years. Nobody noticed it, so they didn't write about it. Okay? But there's more why this happens. That's not the only reason. We also have, as it says here, are there secret underground cities? Cappadocia in Turkey, known for its lunar-like region, has no less than 36 underground cities. Out of these 36 cities, Derinkuyu is the most impressive and deepest of all. The city remained hidden from the world until 1963. Now, why do you suppose there were underground cities? Perhaps because there were other nations trying to come and destroy the, war going on. They had a war. So you might say, well, okay, there are occasions when something strange could happen, like some other nation would come in and divert a river and flood your city so they could take it over, right? And we saw that the other day when I did that video about Scotland, where there were certainly some people that lived in Scotland and some of the big cities, and then the city was destroyed many different times. Over a period of a couple hundred years, it was destroyed because it seems that there were other people, like a different race or group of individuals that were swooping in that area trying to take it over. And, perhaps it's like capitalists today. They want to take out your product, your company, because then that gives them a monopoly. So there may have been a group of, or a tribe, or a group of individuals that wanted to rule the world, like Genghis Khan, or Napoleon Bonaparte, or Alexander the Great, or somebody else. Maybe Alexander the Great had a better reason for all of his war machine, his soldier. Maybe he realized there was another war machine out there, the Genghis Khan Danite group, the Vikings. That's all they did is run around and murder and pillage. And so they had to have standing armies to protect themselves. And then Alexander the Great went up in there and would take the fight to them. Julius Caesar did that. So there might be two different reasons for war. One, some people might just be trying to protect themselves. Others might just have a policy where they believe in genocide. Maybe it's two different religions. And we talked about that. But, so you think, well, that would be kind of a rare thing. But we see these windows and this mud flood thingy thing, or whatever we're trying to interpret this as a mud flood. But we see these pictures all over the place. So that proves it. Well, here's an example. Pretty much all over the place, if you look at old pictures or read books, you'll find that all the cities had these huge garrisons. Sometimes they had castles because they needed the watchtower, and they had soldiers up there to defend the city. And they had these big walls, and then they would have a watchtower on the wall. And so all the cities had to have garrisons and walls and soldiers to defend themselves. Yeah, now we see a big wall, we go, oh, I know why that is. All the cities had walls. That's no, conspiracy. There was war all over the world for thousands of years. People tried to kill each other. That's why they had to have walls. And that's why people built cities, for protection. Not only from the wild beasts. That's why Marduk became God. Because Marduk was able to make law and order and protect the people from what? Well, wild beasts. It started off just protecting people from the cold. Giving them more comforts. Little adobe apartments. Maybe they had a little barbecue pit where they could cook, and they had a place to sleep, and they were inside some walls where there were no roaming bears. And in ancient times, they had some crazy, evil, huge animals. They talk about dragons and stuff. I mean, today we've gotten rid of a lot of the population of the wild animals, so we don't think it's a big deal. There are not that many bear or ferocious animals in the world anymore. We've killed them all off, but back in the day, there were so many animals. Bible talks about it. They were scared to death from the beasts of the field. And they would go into these little communities to protect themselves. I mean, women and children were scared to live out in the woods by themselves, so they lived in cities. But then, if a city had food and another city didn't have any, had a famine, sometimes they would go and steal the food from the other city. And then this probably became a thing. You had to have soldiers to protect yourself because people might be coming to take away your women. Hey, The lust of woman is one of the many causes of a great deal of trouble in this world. So we look at a city with these big walls and we don't say, well, now, why did they have walls? You don't ask that question because you see there's a wall. Nobody's trying to hide it. So then if we see a city where they lived underground, sometimes the places that they have that are underground aren't even visible. And there's no doors visible. And you don't know how to get down there. You say, why would they do that? Maybe it's a mud flood. Well, maybe because they were hiding. So here in Turkey, they had so much war, they built cities underground for protection, perhaps. And maybe it's hot and it's cooler down there, or cold and it's warmer down there. Think about this. Today we live in houses that are above ground. We understand basements, we get that. But nobody has an underground city that is well known. I mean, we've heard of it, right? But it's not like something else. Oh, there's a city over here. It's all underground. We don't do that anymore. At least not publicly. There might be cities underground. And that's a whole nother video that I would like to do. I mean, I literally know there are underground cities that the elite are using. We call them bases and stuff. We know that. But I don't mean just little bases. I mean, there's a whole underground network. But that's a whole nother video. But it's still relevant here because, even if you can't imagine the vast underground world that was probably made on purpose, imagine if some people lived all over the world in cities 2,000 years ago. And over time, the wind and the dirt blew over it and piled up and it got buried. And they just built over it. We know that that's a fact. We go to Egypt. Most of the pyramids that you see down there in Egypt today, and Nubia and Ethiopia and stuff, they weren't even visible when they first went down there. They were all under the sand. They dug them all out. That's just something that happens over a period of time. But this could be ancient cities from thousands of years ago. So we see these old cities in Rome or other big cities. And we say, why do they have these underground cities? They must have built them and they know about them, or it got flooded. That's what it is. It got flooded with a mud flood. And yet there are so many other possibilities. Like I said, Rome existed from 753 BC till today. That's like 2,500 years that there's been this city there. And in that amount of time, I'm sure they have built buildings on top of buildings several times. So there's probably a whole level or two beneath some of these ancient cities. And that wouldn't really be a mystery. Okay, that's not really a mystery. Because if the city flooded, that could be because of war. I mean, if they had to have walls around their cities to protect them, and soldiers and police and everything, then maybe that's why. Because other nations tried everything to destroy them. And if they had these walls and they couldn't attack them, or they were scared to have a war with weapons because they didn't want to die, one way to do it is just starve them out, flood them, burn them out. This happened to a lot of cities. If you start burning a city, sometimes what happens is that once the wall comes down, it ruins the dam or the dike, and then it floods. Because all these cities have to have water. They're usually built on a river or near a river because there's a big city, so they need water. So if it's a large city, it's going to have a lot of water necessary to live. So if it's a large city, they're going to need a large river, a good sized running stream anyway. And so if you were to dam up the river in some way or divert it, it wouldn't take that much work. These guys were, think about these people that would come in and they would build the city, masons. That's another thing I was looking at. These Mormons that went to Utah, they built like 4 or more of these big temples, and they're absolutely huge, made out of marble and granite, and just they're the most amazing buildings. The one in Manti, the one in St. George. They rival the one that's in Salt Lake, literally. People don't even realize it, but the one in Manti, it is on a hill. And some people think the hill wasn't there when they built it. Or the Mormons found it there and just added something to it, that it was already there, because this town of Manti only had like 200 men in that town. And somehow or another, in just a few years, they built this temple that would rival any temple in the world. It's like hundreds of feet high. Above ground today, it's only like 4 huge, towering levels. I mean, like each level is like 18 feet or something. It's a long ways up there. But the hill goes down another 100 feet. And there's this big wall that goes all around the hill. It looks like it was, at one time, if you cleared away all the dirt, it was this massive temple that's unbelievably large. We don't know, but there are certainly a lot of, over there in Utah, a lot of these buildings that you can find that have these like basements and like half windows, and you wonder why. Because, again, you can dig down some of these windows and find that there's dirt over the window. My attention is perked up by that, and I look at that, and it does seem a little puzzling, but when you think about how there are things in life that we don't really realize is happening because it happens over time. Like I said, you take a flat plane and you build a city. Just one story, right? That's all you need. 10 feet above the ground. You go 100 years, maybe it gets abandoned or even if it's not abandoned. Like every day, like maybe the sand creeps up half an inch. People don't even know it. They're walking over the sand. It gets higher and higher because the wind blows it up against the buildings. And over 50 years, now there's a foot of new earth. They've been gardening and just, it goes so slowly they don't notice it. But now half their window is buried. I think that is the real reason why all of these windows are buried in, by dirt around all these buildings. And in some of these other ones, like in huge major cities where we got these looks like a whole underground city down there. I think that was caused from certain floods and disasters, volcanic eruptions like Pompeii. The ash can come and just cover an entire city like it wasn't even there, but preserve the whole thing completely intact. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons why we could see this. Now, this is an interesting way to look at this too. We see all these pictures that have these underground areas, and we think, well, it must be a mud flood, right? But now here is some construction that is massive, built out of stone, but supposedly not built that long ago. This is the Mormon temple in Salt Lake, and now they're doing renovation. And so we see that even the Mormon temple goes down beneath the earth, and it was only, like, I don't know how many years ago, it was 150 years ago or something. So, wasn't that long ago. There wasn't any war, right? There wasn't no mud flood. We've got history, continuous history, that says there wasn't any mud flood in Salt Lake. And yet they still built it underground. And if they built it in the year they said they built it, I don't know, like they finished it in 1890 or something. I don't know the exact date, but that's not that long ago. And if they built it, the whole thing by themselves, which there might be speculation, we could speculate, maybe when they went out there, they just found this amazing temple. There's some indication of that. I just saw a video about the temple in Manti, which pretty weird. It's built on a hill. It's massive. I had no idea how big that thing was. It's probably taller than this one. But the reason we start thinking like this is because first of all, the town of Manti, the records show there was only about 200 men in that town. And supposedly with these 200 men, that evidently were all skilled laborers, masons, they're all of them masons, and this 200 men built this massive temple in just a few years, I guess. Very short period of time. quarried the rocks, brought them there, set them up, built this. I mean, it's just ornate, intricate, beautiful temple. I know sometimes things sound very hard, and they're not that hard for people to know how to do it. I mean, these Masons built these temples and cathedrals all over the world. How did they do it? Well, I don't know. But all indication is that these Masons, even if there were only 200 of them, and maybe only 50 of them were skilled laborers, but somehow they built this Manti temple and the one in Salt Lake City, not that long ago. We've got the history here in America. We've got all the history. There was no mud flood, and they still did it. So perhaps many of these huge buildings that Masons build are all built with this basement down underground and windows and all of that. And then over maybe a couple of 100 years, the wind blows and the dirt starts piling up. So there's a lot of reasons for this. Take a look at some of these pictures. Looks like quite a few feet underground, and it does look like, I'm not sure, is that windows or something down there? I don't know what that is. That's a long ways down. That's like, and if you look, there are, beneath those windows, which would have been ground level, it does seem to look as if the windows originally went down further. I don't know. It does look like it, doesn't it? So was there a mud flood there in Salt Lake that we're not being told about? And why are they tearing down the entire part of the temple and rebuilding it? Some people said that they were trying to get rid of the Masonic symbols, but I don't think they'd be doing that. Others said it was because they had to redo it because of the earthquake they had there recently, and they wanted to make it earthquake-proof. What are they expecting, an earthquake? Now look at that. That's underground, right? Or it would be. And yet you've got this intricate detail and steps and all of this. What doesn't that look like steps? And maybe there was a door there that they closed, or it's crazy. Now there's definitely was originally doors and windows down there. And we know the history of Salt Lake City. I don't believe there was any mud floods in Salt Lake City. So whatever's causing this, we should look at Salt Lake City as a model. Because here's Masons. These are the same kind of people that build all these cathedrals all around the world. These are the Tartarians. So this would be a good place to start right here in Salt Lake City. Let's take a look. Dedicated in 1893, it is the sixth. Oh, that's the same year that they did that World Fair in Chicago. Right? So they're having the World Fair in Chicago, building this massive city. And there's some more Masons over here in Salt Lake building another massive city in the middle of the desert, right? With very few people. And it's the sixth temple completed by the church, requiring 40 years to complete, and the fourth temple built since the Mormon exodus from Nauvoo, Illinois in 1846. The temple was closed in December of 2019 for a general remodeling and seismic renovations that are anticipated to take approximately 4 years. It says it required 40 years to complete. Now that makes sense if it took them 40 years to build it. So it says the temple site was dedicated on the February 14th, 1853 by Heber C. Kimball. Groundbreaking ceremonies were presided over by Brigham Young, who laid the cornerstone on April 6th of that year. That was 1853. The architect was Truman O. Angell. Oh man, so it's an angel, but he was a true man. A true man named an angel. This is crazy stuff. I'm seeing that all over the place. The guy that was the architect for Chalago, that whole white city there that looks like some Athenic Roman city. The guy that built that was named Burnham. And then after he built it, he burned it. Yeah. And remember we were saying it looks very Gothic, where he says, Truman O. Angell and the temple features both Gothic and Romanesque elements. Both Gothic and... See, the Romanesque was what Joseph Smith did. The two temples in Kirtland, Ohio, and Nauvoo, and those temples were white and Romanesque. But now they're saying, well, there's some Romanesque, but there's also Gothic. Well, I think it's pretty Gothic, this temple. So then it says the walls are quartz, monzonite. Wow. It has the appearance of granite, but it's actually quartz. From the Little Cottonwood Canyon, 20 miles southeast of the temple site, oxen transported the quarried rock initially, but the Transcontinental Railroad neared completion, and the remaining stones were carried by rail at a much faster rate. The capstone, the granite sphere that holds the statue of the angel Moroni, was laid on April 6, 1892. So, 1892, from 1853, that is 40 years. So, if you really think about it, that doesn't, to me, sound unreasonable. That these men built this magnificent, huge, Gothic building in 40 years. That does seem reasonable to me. So again, when you really do some investigating, you find out that, life happens and people do some amazing things. We don't know how they built the pyramid, right? We don't even know how they built that. But that's so far back in history when we can talk about giants or Nephilim or something crazy, or maybe they did it by oxen and cart too. We don't know. But this is something that just happened not very long ago. I mean, 1892, that's a little over 100 years ago they finished this temple. There wasn't any mud floods sufficient to bury 40 feet of this building in that amount of time. So evidently these masons, whoever they are, they always build their buildings 40 feet underground. Now, I don't know why they do that. But anyway, guys, we're over an hour now, so I'm going to go ahead and close, and I hope you have a wonderful evening, and may the Lord bless you, and we will see you tomorrow, and we'll pick it up here right where we left off.